The sun is shining. Sat and I are on a podcast. The Toronto Blue Jays are up 1-0 in the World Series, and I'm vibing, baby. It's another edition of Ruthless Discussion here on Wrestle Purist. Make sure that you've liked this video and subscribed to Wrestle Purist if you haven't already. Thank you all once again for joining us. Leave a comment down below what you thought about this podcast, your thoughts about the topic in general, because today, Sat, you and I were having a little conversation, a little talk, where it's always kind of been a bit of a trend, hasn't it? That you've got top stars who maybe get hot at not quite the time that you would hope they would have as a booker. You, Sat, the professional booker. It's a problem you face all the time, I'm sure.
I do.
But what do you do with that person? And unfortunately, for the ones that we're going to talk about today, the answer to that has been miss the boat and not pull the trigger and leave them kind of spinning their tires in the push in the aftermath of the push that could have been. So that's going to be what we're talking about here. Sat, what's causing all this?
You know what's causing all this? Because I must speak on the behalf of Tempest, because he's still actively boycotting SmackDown, and I rate him for it. I was doing it for ages, but slowly but surely, certain things happen.
I will not watch that show. I will not. I won't bring myself to do it.
I don't really watch it either, to be honest. I just watch specific matches. Then I'm like, sayonara. I'm like, when you go in, you're like, I'm gonna check on my friends. It's kind of like you quit your workplace, but you're like, I still got mates there. I'm gonna come say hello and I'm gonna leave. I don't work there anymore. So currently in the world of the World Wrestling Federation, especially on SmackDown, Cody Rhodes is a WWE champion. But I feel like it's probably the worst period in terms of his WWE run since he's come back, because there's not a lot of compelling heels for him to face. And you'd think there's not a lot of compelling heels. They're really not, because off the top of my head, I cannot name you a guy that is ready to be a viable threat or be believable to take the title off him. Drew McIntyre is the main reason, one of the main reasons I wanted to do this topic today. So Drew's been like world champion like 3 times, I think, because he won the WWE title twice during the pandemic, battle. That's a Battle Dome, wherever
Thunderdome,
Videodrome era. I don't know, Thunderdome era. And then he had that few minutes as a world champion, which didn't last that long. If you sneezed, then you missed it. So he's been 3 times world champion in total. You can argue during like the Battle Dome era,
Thunderdome. Mario Kart Electrodome.
Back in doing the Thunderdome era, for a lot of people, they're not going to go back to it, right? And it's almost like, did that world title reign really happen? Well, it had to, because that's the only reason why Drew McIntyre is where he is today. That and the CM Punk feud. But anyway, so I'm saying that he had a run, it was bad luck. And then he had a few minutes with the title, but we've never really had a Drew McIntyre title reign that mattered with the fans involved, probably ever. And since then, there's been a hook of like, this is the time he's gonna get to the next level, because he's been to the mountaintop, but he's been mostly upper mid card. But then he had a feud with CM Punk, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the feud that's made him. He's a made man, bona fide main eventer. I mean, he's great on the promos, he's great in the ring. He's finally figured it out, especially as a heel, because he will seem like the type of guy to be a much better heel than he is babyface, even though his babyface run was surprisingly well for me. But he hasn't really been doing much in the year of 2025. He's been in nothing feuds. He was hand-holding Damian Priest because Damian Priest needed an opponent at WrestleMania. So you can like tag your it. He's kind of like in the same situation that Punk was in. It's like you come away from a great program, proving yourself. You should be rewarded by it with WrestleMania, because that's the way we see it, right? WrestleMania is like currency. This like big bonus. This is like, you're gonna get made, pal. WrestleMania moment. But no, he hasn't really doing much. And even the feud with Jacob Fatu that was meant to be starting. No offense, I like Jacob Fatu. I really do. But for me, of someone that's meant to be of Drew McIntyre's caliber, there's almost like a step down. It's like you're not going up. You're being put in a position to elevate someone else. That doesn't scream to me, we're going all the way with you. So in that feud, it would have been for me a 50-50 booking. Maybe Drew may win in the end because it's Drew. But I feel like
with a Samoan involved, I don't think so.
I forgot Bloodline Hunter, worse than bloody Elite Hunter. Kazarian, shout out to that guy. I lost to Luke Gallows, and that was the end of that bloody character. What I'm trying to get at is that it was rumored that it was meant to be Cody Rhodes versus Drew McIntyre for Survivor Series. That was going to be the WWE title match. Because of the injury of Jacob Fatu, they've accelerated it for Saturday night's main event, which in people's mind is a glorified house show. So it's like, is Cody going to lose to Drew McIntyre? Because the last match they had, because I forgot what last pay-per-view show they had together. I don't know if it was WrestlePalooza or something else. Apparently, Drew McIntyre was rumored to win the title, but Triple H, who's allergic to doing anything new or different, was like, nah, keep the title on Cody. Cody needs a shake-up right now. And SmackDown something. Even though I spoke to a well-respected person within the wrestling industry who says it's like a Triple H go-to. Title changes just for the sake of popping the crowd. There's nothing that's going to be followed up on it. There's no foresight into it. So let's do it. Let's give Drew McIntyre a title reign, because I do feel like if Drew loses at that main event, we've completely missed the boat, which is the title of this episode. Because how many times I'm going to say his time's coming, right now? No one cares. Even his Twitter shtick has died because he's supporting this old alleged or sex pest. So Drew McIntyre's 2025 has not been great in terms of social media, IWC, and in terms of what's going on in wrestling. So that's what's causing all that.
It's causing a lot. And I'm glad that we were having this conversation to spur on this ruthless discussion, because I do think it's an interesting topic to kind of look at. You could take this and make any one particular example of this, like a full podcast episode, break down their career, look at, kind of as we have been with Drew McIntyre, take him as an example, where you look at, he's had a run, but it's a pandemic run. Everyone's been waiting for him to get a proper run. And that just hasn't ever really happened. Now, I think another great example of all of this was the first Clash at the Castle, when that was the first time in a very long time that it felt like a real possibility that Roman Reigns could lose his Universal title. And Drew McIntyre was as hot as he possibly could be, to the point where I think everybody kind of, I don't want to say unanimously, but a lot of people were predicting that Drew was going to win the title on that show.
We were there together. We were there together on the What's Wrong show.
Absolutely. And you could debate whether or not, in hindsight being 2020, that was the right decision. You've got, you go to WrestleMania, you maybe lose out on a lot of the Sami Zayn bloodline stuff if you pull the trigger then, right?
Yeah.
And that's all well and good, right? You could make the argument that was the time for Drew, or it wasn't the time for Roman to lose the belt. That's fine. That's a somewhat separate discussion. What I really want to get to with all of this, because I think it applies to that timeline and also to this one that we've currently been in, from WrestleMania 40 onward for Drew, is this is a guy that has always been on the cusp of really breaking through into that next level. The Punk feud, as you said, was the closest that we've gotten to it, since the Clash of the Castle match, where he has gone and made himself undeniable on TV. And yet, still, despite being undeniable, WWE has continued to deny him. And that, I think, is more the problem. I don't necessarily think that he needs to win a title in order for that run to kind of happen. But, I think it's a surefire way of doing it, specifically because the Clash and now this feud with Cody are happening in this like autumn dead zone of WWE booking, where they don't ever really seem to want to pull the trigger on something big. And that's always fascinating to me, because they used to do that. You used to have like the little feuds through the fall where the title change might happen, or you'd set up who the champion will be going into WrestleMania. But now it feels like the pendulum is swung back the other way, to the point where if you win the title at SummerSlam, it's almost guaranteed you're holding it until Mania.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not against long title reigns in that, but it does restrict you from capitalizing on someone getting hot.
Yes.
And Drew has been hot a number of times around this time of year, and I think that has been to his detriment. You brought up the Damian Priest feud. And I think that is a real good look into what Drew McIntyre is seen as in the eyes of those booking WWE. Because you're right. You have a tremendous feud, coming off of the Punk rivalry and his Hell in a Cell match with Punk. And you have basically his entire 2025, which mostly was the Punk stuff, but a world title match at WrestleMania, being screwed out of the world title several times over. And you would think that that would pay off in some way at WrestleMania. Now, you say all that, you look at everything else that's going on, and you know that you want to do, you know, Cody and Cena for one title. Now,
Hmm.
could you argue that Drew and Gunther, and maybe, I don't know, spice that up a little bit? I remember at one point I was pitching for them to do Drew, Sheamus, and Gunther in a three-way for the world title last year at WrestleMania as
Oh,
like, the sequel to their 5-star triple threat match at Mania 39, right? For the IC
yeah.
title. Just as an example. But in my mind, it was keeping Drew in that loop because not only did he earn a major match at WrestleMania through his work in 2024,
Hmm.
but it feels a bit more like the next logical step for his character, to go back to the world title that he was so routinely screwed over for. And if you just on paper, if the day of WrestleMania 40, you said, okay, uh, Priest is going to screw Drew on this show. He's going to win the world title, Money in the Bank style. And then next year, Drew is going to face Priest at WrestleMania and get his win back, or that's his revenge, or whatever. I don't necessarily think just on paper that's a bad idea. That makes sense. That's not just a random match. But
Yeah.
by the time that they got there, it was very clearly like this is not the next chapter in Drew's ascension to get back to that point. This is
Hmm.
just something for Drew to do at
Yeah.
WrestleMania. It's just a way that we've got these two kind of upper mid card guys, and we need something for both of them to do. So let's put them together. That is far less productive a way to try and keep the heat on Drew after a big push from his Punk feud than it maybe seemed like when it was planned months out. So it opens this kind of discussion where, again, I don't necessarily think pulling the trigger on a guy has to mean him winning a top title, but it can. But if you're not going to do that, then you need to supplement that with a push of any sort of significance because he's not had that in 2025. And I feel like that is the kind of drop ball that you then can look back on, and connect to the various other examples that we'll give in this discussion. Because capitalizing on someone who gets hot organically has never quite been WWE's strong suit. It's
No.
not only them. This has very much been a problem across the board. You can pull examples from AEW of Tony not pulling the trigger on guys when they either are really hot or they have a match that captures people's imaginations or whatnot. So it's an industry wide kind of thing. This could, of course, open up broader discussion, broader ruthless discussion, if you will, about that sort of thing where, again, kind of like I was saying about Drew at Clash, in hindsight, you know, them keeping the title on Roman, at least at that point, I don't think can be looked at as a bad thing, given what was
No.
still to
No.
come. The Sammy
No.
feud and the first Cody match where they should have done the title change and things like that, you know? So kind of similarly, if you take a few of these other examples, maybe someone like an LA Knight who's just kind of been waiting for the capitalization of his big push and a kind of mid subpar US title reign where he was not even the focus of that kind of mid card division, on SmackDown being the highlight of it, doesn't feel like the big payoff that he had been waiting for and fans had been waiting for with regards to his popularity. So, the point that I'm trying to get at with that is okay, if you do pivot your plans, it is a more difficult choice and decision to make if you do have plans in place that you think are going to be good, right?
Yeah.
I.e., the Drew stuff. However, if you don't have plans in place that would be better, like I think there should be a lot more adaptability and flexibility with these storylines in pro wrestling in general, because as we have seen, not going with a guy, kind of as we were talking about with regards to the young guys on last week's show, or 2 weeks ago rather, they are not guaranteed to stay hot.
Mm-hmm.
And that will affect their career going forward now and forevermore. If you just decide not to capitalize on a big push at this given moment and they just fall off, that could have real impact on their career. Now, you do bear some responsibility for that as booker and everything, but it's a lot of different things to kind of weigh up. Basically, you need to find that line between whether your pre-existing plans are better and are going to be more over in whatever form that is than this new guy who's caught fire.
You know what? You used a great example when you mentioned LA Knight, because he's another guy we're going to talk about, and I want to shout out Finn Balor. So just to
Mm-hmm.
open the conversation wider, in terms of waiting too long, but here's where that issue I have. I do feel like, because you mentioned Roman Reigns, Clash of the Castle, great memory
Yeah.
right there. Because I forgot that was another time where Drew McIntyre seemed like he was primed and ready to win the title. So the biggest issue with Roman Reigns' title reign, the biggest issue was when he became a unified champion, because you had two belts for one person. So you kind of began a hostage situation with the title, because you had a lot of guys that was getting hot or getting close on the cusp, but they had nothing to do. They start spinning their wheels, start, winning intercontinental titles, United States title. You got, guys like AJ Styles. Like, I don't know, it's quite hard. I feel like in the 21st century, or because it did start in the 21st century, because it's the 2000s. I'm trying to say, well, in the 2020s, it's quite normalized for a main eventer to then later on win the mid card title, when that used to seem almost sacrilege. Like 2001 Triple H winning the Intercontinental title from Jeff Hardy seems so bizarre and weird. I'm like, you Austin would never do that. You know what I'm saying? It was
Yeah.
we were trained that in WWE, because in WCW, Ric Flair won the United States title multiple times after he became world champion. So that wasn't even a thing. So it's just like in the WWE space, because they were the monopoly was WWE. They were teaching us, if you're a main eventer, don't expect Brock Lesnar to be Intercontinental champion. Don't expect John Cena to be United. Oh, he changed that as well. I'm just saying, like, at the time, when you're a main eventer, that's where you're gonna be. And if you're a mid carder, that's what you're gonna be. Because there used to be like a clear separation of, like, you get career mid carders, like I use Razor Ramon as an example, or even Mr. Perfect. It's quite weird to say Mr. Perfect when he was world champion in AWA, and I want that to be preserved. When you're world champion somewhere else, that does matter. It doesn't mean, oh, well, it was in WWE. Who is WWE to say that? Yeah, they lasted longer and they got all the money and all that kind of stuff, and they control the history. But being a world champion in a prominent a company that somewhere else that's not WWE should be championed. The issue I was getting that in terms of Roman Reigns holding two belts hostage, you got guys like Drew McIntyre who had to spin the wheel and do nothing. You got guys like LA Knight. Yeah, he was in the NXT. You can quite easily, if a senile, if a booker that wasn't senile was booking things, you'd be like, oh, we got a guy like LA Knight that can boost our upper mid card or main event scene or wherever it is. We don't fire Bray Wyatt. We don't fire Braun Strowman. We've got like a strong universal title scene or wherever title it was, the WWE title. I think that was the title that Roman ended up taking. Or Big E, God bless him, if he didn't get flipping suplexed by a guy that's now released. What I'm trying to get at is, now there's like a race between guys that we're waiting too long for them to pull the trigger on and the young guys. There's like two queues of guys to try to get to the main event. So that's why Damian Priest became world champion. Because you can argue that's a guy, when he debuted with Bad Bunny and stuff like that, he was getting a decent push as United States champion. But the issue was he wasn't really over with the fans. Because as much as I like Damian Priest, he was not getting big reaction. It seemed one of those pushes where it's like your push is more over than you are, in terms of like the bookers. The fans don't really care for you, or the belt is making you, because the fans didn't really care. They didn't really know him. He's just a guy that came in the main roster, teamed up with Bad Bunny. He won the United States title, was rarely losing. Then he lost, and then he had that descent, and everybody knows the history. But had they kept the trajectory, he quite easily could have been a WWE Championship candidate over on SmackDown or Raw, wherever the title was at the time, if it never got split. It's created that backlog where a guy like Finn Balor had to go to NXT to reheat himself, came back on the main roster. He was a fodder for Roman Reigns because the whole BS with the demon before the whole Edge situation happened in his match with Roman Reigns. The ring
Yep.
ropes breaking, him
An
being
act of
resuscitated.
God.
Right? If you were to look at why Finn Balor is where he's at, you could look back at the Roman Reigns feud. Yeah, the Edge feud kind of solidified it. And I feel like that's where Drew McIntyre is right now. This is his Edge WrestleMania Hell in a Cell match against Cody on Saturday Night's main event. If he loses this match, I don't think anyone, it would take an act of God, like you said. It would take something so big to get fans to care about Drew McIntyre being champion, because I feel like the expiration date on his Punk residuals are running out. So it's going to go back to being, yeah, Drew McIntyre. Yeah, good talker. Yeah, big guy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a
But
reliable fall time feud for the champion that you don't want to take the title off of.
exactly. So that is what my issue has been. You wait too long and you miss the boat. We talked about it on our first episode. Shout out to it being episode 3. We talked about how a young guy, wait for it. They're the future, and all of a sudden they become the past. Why is all of a sudden we've got Pete Dunne being a producer now, and you got Tyler Bates? They're both under a mask, and you wait too long. That doesn't scream to me, oh, they're gonna get pushed next year. Nope. That is career mid-carders unless they leave and go somewhere else. Candice LeRae has now been tapped for now producing matches, and I can't help but feel like she was never someone who like, oh, wait for a long time. It seemed like she got slapped with an Natalia label straight on from NXT onwards.
My
And it's quite bizarre,
PWG demon. I'm so
right?
sad.
You know what the weird thing is? Let's talk about Candice LeRae for a second. She was in everyone's dream signing during NXT time. When NXT was bolstering and big, and Johnny Gargano was in NXT, so you couldn't help but look at Johnny and think about his wife. And you're like, oh, Candice. Oh, and they got Candice, and then Candice made an appearance. Oh my gosh, she's here. And then I was like, oh my gosh, she's gonna be champion by next year. And it never happened. And the highest she ever gotten was tag team champions. And it always confused me. And then you hear how AEW, the Bucks wanted to get her, and she's still willingly choosing. I get it, her husband's there. You choose family. I guess it is a case of choosing family over personal goals, but she would be multiple time AEW world champion right now if she chose to leave. It's just, again, I'm gonna throw it back to you. It's a case of waiting too long and you're missing the boat, and you got young guys who are also waiting. So it's like a collision course between guys are waiting so long, but guys you need to push as well. So it is like a weird backlog from the 4 years of Roman Reigns monopolizing both titles. Because all of a sudden, like, you get a title, you won't get a title. And you got guys that have more over than the guys that's getting the title. That's also the issue as well.
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of good points there. I want to kind of zero in on the idea of Roman Reigns having the both belts, and that being kind of the catalyst for a lot of these sort of things, because I don't want to use a lot of the booking from WWE in like, the 2000s to early 2010s as like, here's the example of how to do things right, because I'm not going to do that, but that being said, when you had the 2 world titles doing that, and you had things like Money in the Bank, that means that if you want your guy to be world champion, if you're John Cena for a year, you can still do that. And you can have the other belt be the one that can kind of get bounced around or have shorter reigns, or maybe you experiment with a new guy. And I would probably say that they should have picked better guys, generally speaking. I'm not going to say that they should have had Jack Swagger win the world heavyweight title and things like that, not an example in line with the discussion that we are necessarily having. But the kind of point that I want to make with that is, when you consolidate the belts between a guy who is not going to lose either of those belts for another year, then I kind of think that you hamstring a lot of your roster, and you're so locked into, well, I guess no one's getting the top title push unless you're, Cody Rhodes, and he's able to wait out a year of poor decision making to finally get his moment, Similarly to all of these sort of things, if there is that other belt, and obviously they introduced one eventually, They've introduced a world heavyweight championship, and that kind of has been the title that they've done that with. That's the title that Damian Priest, wins. That's
Gunther.
that's Gunther wins his first world title. There's plenty of that sort of thing going on. But it still feels like they're kind of set in their ways with the things they want to do. And that has resulted in LA Knight has never really gotten his extended push atop the company. It could be applied. Finn Balor didn't get his push, when he's facing Seth Rollins at SummerSlam, the first year that the world title was around, and that was looked at the time as kind of the last shot that he was going to have at being, a world championship guy. So I want to make it clear that not everyone can get the top push. Not everyone can win the title. There are only so many titles to go around, and if you give them to everybody, that will devalue the title. Exclusivity among your world champions is a strength. That being said, hearkening back to my earlier point about Drew, is you don't have to win the title in order to capitalize on someone's momentum. If you can capitalize on someone's momentum without putting the title on them immediately, then you can start crafting your long-term storyline that culminates with them being world champion. It feels like that is where we have kind of lost the ability to book these guys that catch fire, is just finding something for them to do that is of comparable levels to the level of over that they are. What has LA Knight done over the last couple of years other than just kind of bounce around, have various feuds, be US champion a couple times? Like, that's kind of it, and I think that is very much on the fault of the booker. I think there are ways, again, that you can point to things like that being done fairly well, because I think you could look at Sami Zayn coming out of the Bloodline deal. It's like that was by far the most over he's been on the main roster. That was very much a time where people were saying, put the belt on him. I know it's the one right before WrestleMania, but you can do that. It will be the culmination of a fantastic story. He's super over, the angle super hot, all of these sort of things. And at least for a little while afterwards, what they did with the tag titles, they were able to keep the heat on Sami Zayn. I don't think they managed to do that super long term, because I do think WWE's booking about midway through 2023 completely fell off a cliff. And the separation of Kevin and Sammy to then have both of them kind of do nothing, other than go for mid-card titles on their respective shows, is not a suitable follow-up to their involvement in the Bloodline and everything that went into that to make that story so exciting and over and popular and all these things. But at least for a little while, the tag title, I think winning those at WrestleMania from the Usos was a suitable, okay, but we're gonna keep the fire going. We're not gonna put you on the back burner. We're gonna put you on the main burner and turn the heat up, and it's gonna be this big angle, and you're gonna win the tag titles, and that's gonna be a really big thing. I think you can still put the heat onto a feud without having the guy win the world title. It's just that they still rarely do that. I'm struggling to come up with examples of them finding ways to keep guys hot whilst away from the world title when they reach that kind of level of over. And that to me is very frustrating.
Even mid-card. I mean, do you know, it's going to sound very sad. I'm still waiting for the outcome of Chad Gable with the Intercontinental title.
Aren't we all?
Right?
Aren't we fucking all, bro?
Right? He's another example, right? For this, I must outright say Vince McMahon did a lot of damage, right? Because you hear Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle did an interview, and every time I feel like it's like a prerequisite. If you're gonna interview Kurt Angle, man, I gotta put that Chad Gable question. He gets it all the time. Yeah. I mean, he's gonna say the same thing because Chad Gable is incredible, and Kurt Angle's got a great eye for talent, but the thing I'm thinking about is Triple H did a great job of hoodwinking wrestling fans, some who had no idea about his reputation from when he was a main roster wrestler and a political influencer backstage. So when the NXT run happened, when he was head booker or whatever, so you got guys like Adam Cole, you'd be like, oh, I guess he vibes with Adam Cole, because on paper Adam Cole's not Adam Cole ROH in terms of physique wise. He was one of his tiniest in terms of frame wise in WWE. But he went with, Johnny Gargano. Again, guys would be like, oh, all right. Because it's the same Triple H who said Kurt Angle's too small to be world
Sure.
champion. Do you remember
Yeah.
that story? And then I
I
think it was
do.
Joe Briscoe. Joe Briscoe's all right. If that's true, then go and fight him. He'll show you
Yeah.
if he's too small. And then that shut him up. So Kurt Angle, I don't know if shoot height is like what 5'11", 6 foot before the neck injury. Because I know the neck injury kind of stunted his height. I don't know. Probably he was 6 foot tall once on a good day. Who knows? Or 5'10" on his in his prime. Chad Gable was 5'8". But at the same time, you're like, if guys like Gargano can be champion, if guys like Ciampa can be champion, if Ciampa's in great shape, but again, if you're talking about the booking metrics of the 2000s, he'd be considered an X division guy or cruiserweight division guy. He'd be given a Kid Cash push as cruiserweight champion in 2006 SmackDown. So for me, he did a great job of like, he's changed. He's not like Vince McMahon. He sees the times, guys with smaller frames can be champion. A guy like Daniel Garcia would probably thrive in NXT because, wrestling has changed. It's more about skill than size. It used to be like, oh, you're not big enough, so you can't be world champion. It's all about if you've got skills. Bryan Danielson showed if you got skill set, it doesn't matter what size you are, you can make it through. Guys like Jamie Noble will probably do better today than they did in the early 2000s because, there was a stigma attached to being like 5'7", 5'8". So what I'm trying to get at is Triple H did a great job of like showing that he's more inclusive. Heck, Big E was champion. Hey, we got one black guy, and then Keith Lee was champion. We got two black guys. Yay, that's great. And Velveteen Dream was, a pet project. He's a black guy. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm trying to say that there was an alternative universe where it seemed like Triple H was progressive in his booking. And then you get to the main roster. No matter what anyone says, TKO does not give a crap. As long as you're making money, they ain't going to say, we want that guy pushed. They don't know most of these people's names. Maybe bloody Nick Khan knows certain people. He's like, yeah, I like CM Punk. Let's bring him back. But it's Triple H's show. He gets to book however he wants. And he's booking in the most archaic ways because Chad Gable could and should be world champion. And the reason I'm mentioning Chad Gable, the guy is 40. All right, the guy is 40 years old, and I'm not doing the Vince McMahon ageism because the age is weird in WWE. Back when Vince was in charge, if you're in your 40s, you're never going to be a world champion. Now with Triple H, if you are in your 40s, you're going to be world champion. It's like a bizarro land where back in the days, being in your 40s was a detriment to your career, but now being in your 40s is a detriment to young people's career because now you got guys like Chad. Well, I never got to be world champion because they bungled American Alpha. I was Shorty G for a bit, like a guy that they've wasted so many of his prime years doing stupid bits when he's proven he's a great wrestler. And even El Grande Americano, you tell me El Grande Americano is going to be world champion? No, probably he's going to be international champion then. But it's like, why a gimmick going to be a champion, but instead of him being a serious badass wrestling machine? I love Sami Zayn. The reason why I brought Chad Gable up because he fits the criteria of waiting too long. Sami Zayn got the Intercontinental title. He's the one that beat Gunther, ended his reign. It should have been Chad Gable because the
100%.
emotional investment was there. And
100%.
I feel like the turn, because I want to wrap up what you mentioned about how Sami was the most over he's ever been in the main roster. He had the bloodline residual push, right? And I feel like it started to run out when he intercepted a conclusion to a storyline by him becoming the protagonist instead of Chad Gable when his daughter was crying. And we're like, oh, you can't be doing that. You can't be making someone's kids cry. He's got to beat Gunther's ass and have his daughter in the ring, go, yay, with the title. It never happened. I feel like since then, you had the Karrion Kross feud, which didn't help either in terms of, the matches weren't great. And, at that time, Karrion Kross was more over. It's just like it ruined Sami Zayn's cachet. Even him going to SmackDown, people were like, why is he United States champion when Jacob Fatu was feuding with Solo Sikoa? Because Sami Zayn should be world champion, right? Because you're wasting all these years. And the guy's gonna turn like 42, 43. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like he should have been champion. The championship reign of Damian Priest should have went to Sami Zayn because Sami Zayn's more over.
Yeah. I'm not disagreeing with you.
No,
one single quota. I everybody was still high on WWE at the time, so I kind of I didn't pipe this opinion from the rooftops quite as much, but I was sat there going into WrestleMania 40 going hey, I don't think this Sami Zayn being Gunther's opponent thing is very good. I don't think that makes sense. What we had Chad right here. Why is Chad not at WrestleMania at all? And all of this sort of thing. And now, as I understand it, there were some, political things going on at the time regarding the card of WrestleMania 40 that led to things being shuffled around backstage a little bit. So that very well might have played into it. But I don't think that that is an excuse to absolutely drop the ball with Chad Gable. Chad Gable, who coming into the post Vince McMahon era was one of those guys on Raw who is still doing the jobs for various people, but you could kind of get the feeling that, like, okay, we need the really good wrestlers to be able to put on the really good competitive matches on Raw right now to reestablish Raw as a wrestling show, in the summer of 22 and everything. But wait your turn, it will come. And then we waited a year, and then he starts doing this whole thing with Gunther, and we're like, oh, here it is. He's getting his moment finally. Like, he was a good soldier for waiting his turn. Not everyone could be pushed right out the gate that we were waiting to see pushed, but now we're gonna get to see it. And he loses to Gunther 3 times, and it feels like, okay, now we're okay. WrestleMania is around the corner. That's what's gonna happen. And then they like tease it, and he's still involved in the storyline, and then they don't do it. They go with Sammy instead. And then the post WrestleMania feud is Gable and Sammy, and the whole breakup of Alpha Academy, and it never goes anywhere. American Alpha, I keep calling them that. Alpha Academy.
Yeah.
They keep teasing this breakup in all the pay-per-view matches, and then they break up on Raw in this kind of like half-baked, like they just kind of walk out. There's no big angle, no big moment. And at no point does this culminate with Sami Zayn and Chad Gable having a big title change. I think that's insane. I think that moment, as soon as Sammy beat Chad for, I think, the second time on pay-per-view, it was the end. It was the end of Chad Gable. He got locked in a room with a bunch of Wyatts, and he's just been faffing about with luchadors ever since. And of course, he's hurt currently. Get well soon, Chad. But all of this comes together to say, like, okay, if you wanted to do the Sammy thing, who's to say that Sammy thing could not then also be transferred to Chad Gable after the fact? My overall point of, okay, even if this thing doesn't happen, keeping the plate spinning long enough to get to the point where it can happen is a skill that WWE currently has shown that they do not have.
No.
They keep dropping these various plates that people have been spinning because they have been so good for so long. And I'm sorry, being over is not an indefinite status.
No Otis. Free Otis. Where did that go?
Yeah. It really is a shame. I'm really glad that you had brought up the Chad Gable one in particular, because it gets me riled up again. It pissed me off at the time. It pisses me off now. Again, this I want to flip over to AEW as well a little bit, because this is like, balance it out for, the tribalists out there perhaps.
Yeah.
But people always threw this at Tony Khan as well, as like, he doesn't cash in when someone gets really hot. Whether that's on a big return, returns people are not happy about with regards to AEW, generally speaking. That's fair. With Eddie Kingston and Orange Cassidy, as of late, they just kind of get slot back in. Eddie Kingston, I think, needs a little bit more time to get heated up in terms of actually being in the ring. So I kind of understand that one a little bit more. But generally speaking, capitalizing, striking while the iron's hot has been kind of hit and miss in AEW as well. But because I gave the example with regards to Drew and Roman's long-term title reign, I want to throw it over to like Harley Cameron at the beginning of 2025. Super over, super hot, reaching the peak of her popularity as we have seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Has a match with Mercedes Moné. And I know at the time, I as well was like, yeah, she should win the title. It'd be really great. And you could have Mercedes win it back after 2 weeks even. Get the heat right back on her. But like, do that sort of thing. And they didn't do that. They didn't do that. And again, in hindsight, looking at what Mercedes' year has been, going into All In Texas, wrestling Toni Storm, still being able to say that she's never been pinned or submitted going into that match, I'm like, Yeah, that does make that all better. So
Mm-hmm.
similar to the Roman Reigns deal, I can't fault them for not, pulling the trigger on that right then. But again, were they able to keep up Harley Cameron's popularity after the fact with things to do? Now, she was injured, broke her nose at a point, but that was months later. And in
Yeah.
the interim between those two things, no, she was just kind of, confined to pre show tags and things like that. So I think you can very much apply the same issues that have plagued WWE with regards to this sort of thing to AEW. There are similar comparables on either side, similar
Mm-hmm.
situations,
Mm-hmm.
but I think generally speaking, the like I said, regardless of whether they win that big one or not, if you're able to keep the heat on them for the match beyond having that title match, that I think is where you end up paying dividends with regards to, them being super over. I don't know that they've done a spectacular job on that. There are other examples where, like, I'm not going to necessarily fault them for, like, people have always said that AEW should call an audible, in the ring and had pull a title change and all of
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing. Like, if someone gets super over with particular, like the first Acclaimed and Swerve in Our Glory match, people, point to a lot of the time where like that was the most over the Acclaimed probably have ever been, on that show. People wanted to see them win the tag titles, and people always say, oh, they should have called an audible and halfway through put a message in the ref ear and just be like, oh, we're switching the finish. You guys are winning. I'm not going to say that, like, yeah, sure, maybe, but I feel like that is a slightly more complicated
It
decision.
is. Yeah.
That could be a decision that, if done at the wrong time or whatever, is be like, well, why did you do that? That's impulsive. You shouldn't, blah, 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 blah. Right. But I think there's still enough examples outside of things like that within AEW to point to and be like, yeah, you didn't really capitalize on that guy who was super popular for that amount of time or here, there, or anywhere.
So, you I feel like you're setting up for the guy I want to talk about next. Man, nobody gives a shit about Dante Martin in 2025.
Yeah, all right. We can certainly get into Dante Martin.
Yeah, I mean,
Damn.
let's do it because I
Let's do
seen him
it. Yeah.
because I seen him in backstage segments. He's gotten bigger. You can argue, yeah, he shattered his ankle. You can probably argue he's probably not the same, but I barely see him, man. So I can't accurately say that, oh, he's not the same in the ring. He still bounces, I think. I think because I barely
Yeah.
see. Because here's the issue. Because I don't know. Because I at the time, because my 2025 brain is not like my 2024, 2023 brain when it comes to young guys. Because I was
Sure.
that guy where I'm trying. Basically, Kyle Fletcher's changed everything for me. Right? I'm using him as an example because Dante Martin and Kyle Fletcher have a lot in common. If you know. But in terms of the two tag team guys, two young guys in the tag team, and the tag team partners get injured, right? So
Hmm.
Dante Martin was the original, I feel like, before Kyle Fletcher. I think they probably learned their lesson with Kyle Fletcher. But then again, Kyle Fletcher is legit 6'3.5". He looks like a horse,
He's pretty
scary
fucking
big,
undeniable. I gotta
right?
be honest. Like, maybe you wouldn't have thought as much going into the start of his push when he turns on Osprey and everything, but
Mm,
man, Cal Fletcher has made himself as
undeniable,
undeniable
man.
as can be.
And he's going bigger. I feel like he's going even bigger. He gets big every week. I'm like, because like Takeshita's like the tallest 6'2" guy I've ever seen.
Yeah,
And Kyle Fletcher's the tallest 6'3.5" I've ever seen because he's meant to be the same height as Wardlow, but I feel like he towers over Wardlow, but that's probably
yeah.
why the half an inch matters, maybe. But then again, maybe it's the AEW ring, the dimension, because Kyle Fletcher was like Billy Gunn once upon a time. You're really that big. Wow. Because I used to look at Mark Davis as the big guy, but I was like, you're taller than Mark. Actually, Mark is labeled as like 6'3" or 6'4" at the time, probably legit shoot 6'2", who knows. But yeah, Kyle Fletcher's become undeniable. The reason I mention him is because Dante Martin was the original tag team guy, left to be singles guy. He got over during that trios match. That whole interaction with Kenny Omega made him into a star overnight. Social media clips and so forth. And then he was one of the guys, like Tony did kind of capitalize for a bit, as in like, you are reacting, so we give him more matches. He'll never win it, but it was kind of like the Jeff Hardy. We call it like the Jeff Hardy kind of like trope of like, we're not gonna give you the title, but we can have great showings like against Undertaker and against Triple H. Yeah, he did become internal champion for 2 seconds, but wrestling booking's not like that anymore. I feel like the Japanese wrestling style of booking titles is what's taken over American, and I don't know if I like that. It works in Japan because they're all about prestige and not hot potatoing. But when it comes to American entertainment wrestling, you need more hot potatoes. And I can hear my son outside agreeing with me. He's making noises. But Dante Martin at the time, I felt like Top Flight hadn't reached the potential. It was so obvious he wasn't meant to be a singles guy. So I was all in the decision making of like, let's push him for a bit, but the vision is to be tag team champions. Had Top Flight become tag team champions, then I've been like, you've done a great job of withholding. But it's just, we are a few years from that Dante Martin viral moment, and what has Top Flight done? Absolutely nada.
It's
Kyle,
been several years. Yeah.
yes. And with Kyle Fletcher, his partner got injured twice. The first time's like, okay, we're gonna give you the ROH television championship. And I was thinking, yeah, that's fine. But if this is me, all right, guys, don't go too far with this. This is fine. ROH television title, but his partner's coming back. Aussie Open need that run, all right? They need that run with the tag belts. Don't get too far. And then the Ospreay feud happened. He cuts his hair, changes into trunks, changes his music, and I was like, oh crap, we're never coming back. That's because in my head I was such a completist, because that when you have great tag teams, I'm not the WWE mind of like you guys are just tag teams until we're ready to break you guys up. I see tag teams as like currencies, like money in AEW. They can be huge as well. So I'm like, when you get a great tag team, you want them to fulfill their destiny. And I think because Aussie Open never fulfilled their destiny, it was quite hard in the beginning to get into that. Okay, I want Kyle Fletcher to be pushed, because it felt like Hart Foundation, Bret Hart gets over, but you're like, I want Hart Foundation to be champions. I like Bret, but I don't want him to be internal champion yet. But it's because when Bret won it, the tag team titles as Hart Foundation like 3 times or wherever it was, I was more than ready for him to be IC champion. So for me, I had that kind of brain when it came to Dante Martin and Kyle Fletcher. But Kyle Fletcher's shown, hey man, when timing's there, you go for it. And he's an example that you mentioned earlier of a guy that after his feud with Ospreay, what have they done with him? Well, he's TNT champion now. He's main evented one of the big 2 pay-per-views of AEW. That shows you a great example of booking someone and keeping them hot. Because we got worried because Tony had a history of not, following through after the whole Ospreay feud, after pinning Okada. We were worried that, what is, Kyle Fletcher going to do? Is he going to be like one of the lackeys in Don Callis family? No, his position is one of the crown jewels of that group. So that's a great example of how to push a wrestler and keep him hot. But Dante Martin has been in so many crew. Like, is it AR Fox? Or is it Leo Rush? Is it Action Andretti? Is now Scorpio Sky and Christopher Daniels? They just passed around. And the future of the tag division, Private Party won the title eventually, but they got done dirty because Top Flight and Private Party were meant to be the future of AEW tag division. They waited too long to pull the trigger, and one group is gone. So, and the other group is irrelevant. No one cares about Top Flight. No one does the pop anymore. The Dante Martin pop, the viral moment pop that carried him over for the next year or so. No one cares anymore. He's got poodle hair and he's now bigger, but I just look at him and I just feel sorry.
Yeah, it's difficult because again, there have been times where you could probably look at the AEW tag division and go like, oh well, are those champions better than Top Flight could have been? Who knows? At various points, you could probably argue no. At other points, maybe you could argue yes. I remember that like 2021 stretch when they just come back to buildings and everything in AEW. And it's the first time that people are really getting their eyes on Dante Martin, not just on, TV and in the Daily's Place Dynamites and everything. And for a while there, they did a pretty good job of like keeping the plate spinning with him. And it always felt like it was building to something. Like he had a place on the show. He had a story on the show at all times, going from his feuds with or his teams with the Sydal brothers to then being scouted by Leo Rush, and he's maybe going to be in a team with Leo Rush, and Leo Rush is just he's doing that weird I don't know if he was like a crypto bro or he was just like business Leo Rush. He was big money Leo, I guess, in that weird run he had in late 2021. Comes in, does this, wants to align with Dante Martin. And then Team Taz starts recruiting Dante Martin. And for like 2 weeks, it looks like Dante Martin's going to go with Team Taz. He like takes Hook's chips, which I guess is the way to work your way in. He goes, and then they do the Dynamite Battle Royal, the Dynamite Diamond Ring Battle Royal or whatever that December. And Dante turns on Team Taz, turns on Leo, and Darius comes back shortly after that, and then gets hurt. But it was like from that point, there was nothing for Dante Martin. It felt like, okay, either you're going to do the reunion of Top Flight and that'll go on be what it's going to be, or you're going to really start to go harder with Dante Martin, generally speaking, away from this guy or this guy. He can say, I don't need to be aligned with you. I don't need to be aligned with you. Dante Martin is his own man, and here's whatever he's going to do next. And it felt like they kept that plate spinning, but that was like as long as they could think of to do various different things to keep his character interesting before they just ran out of steam. And from about the end of 2021, and granted, like you said, Top Flight have been very plagued with injuries over the years, and not just minor injuries, stop starting their pushes and everything, like horrible, catastrophic injuries, car crashes, mangled foot and ankle and leg and everything, the whole deal. Bad, thumbs down. I want to put that blame on anybody. But you look at, like, if just the example is the first push of Dante Martin versus the first push of Kyle Fletcher in terms of, hey, their tag team partners got hurt. I do think, generally speaking, Kyle Fletcher has more of the tools to be like a well-rounded star than Dante Martin. So maybe it's a slight false equivalency, but they did so much more for so much longer to keep those plates spinning for one guy than they did the other. And I think that's where, again, you can kind of see, I'm not going to go out there and advocate that, Dante Martin should have been world champion or even TNT champion or anything like that. Yeah. But at a certain point, that push stops, I don't want this podcast to just kind of be like, us yelling at clouds and all of that sort of thing, pointing out various times where pushes failed or bookers fucked up or anything like that, right? No. I think we just kind of want to highlight the fact, that there is kind of this like rigidity of pro wrestling a lot of the time, an unwillingness to be flexible and to adapt to someone getting over, circumstances arising perhaps to allow you to be creative. Fucking look at what's going on Raw. Everything that everybody's been talking about this week on Raw has been either not putting Braun Breaker just immediately into this world title scene because that's going to come later, or maybe throw LA Knight into that scene as well. His match, instead of doing Jey Uso and CM Punk for the world title, throw LA Knight in there, because that is at the very least throwing him a bone after the last few years. I don't know if he would win that match or whatever they're going to do at Saturday night's main event. But again, you've got these guys who are very over and not being rewarded for it. And I think that is a problem within pro wrestling of not rewarding the guys that are over. I mean, fucking hell, you can go back further and really highlight the major examples of them, whether it's like, Zack Ryder in 2011, who, I mean, that man was punished for getting over, so that's all the way at the opposite end of the extreme. Guy gets himself over. How dare you do that? Punish him. Or Rusev Day or whatever. Obviously, those examples are done under the booking practice of a far more senile old man who looked at you getting yourself over as a slight, but similar issues, not quite necessarily to that extreme. I don't think LA Knight is being actively punished for being a superstar, but the unwillingness to go with the guy is still very much kind of a prominent issue, and it is across the industry. And I would like them to be a little bit more capable of adapting on the fly, of rewarding guys like that and finding ways that don't necessarily have to fuck with your top plans that you've had laid out, your plans for next year's WrestleMania, next year's All In, whatever. You don't need to have that be affected by the guy who is hot. You can do both a lot of the time. And I know it's easy for me to just say that, but I do think we've seen, the best bookers are the ones that are able to capitalize on people getting over and perhaps eventually lead that to being someone who is just in that top rotation of guys or girls who can be, main event world championship level.
So to piggyback to continue talking about LA Knight, because he's one of the victims of potentially missing the boat. I feel like in 2025, his booking has been quite interesting because I tweeted twice about him. So at various points. The first time I said that he's probably one of the greatest WWE mid carders since like Razor Ramon. Because I feel like as much and people are like, what? The guy is really he's equivalent to any top star in terms of being over. You put him in there with Punk, you put in them with Cody. It's not like it's one way. Cody gets all the cheers, Punk gets all the cheers. They're chance. They're popping for here, whatever one liner he can think of and stuff like that. He's the kind of guy because we're using the same criteria for why Jey Uso won. Jey Uso, entrance merchant, got over. Yeet got over. So he became very undeniable. Because I remember you and I were having a conversation, like should have been Jey Uso. Weirdly enough, I would have been fine if the biggest push Jey Uso ever got was Royal Rumble. Because they Nakamura the fuck out of me, many times. Oscar's never won the world title. So I've been conditioned that sometimes winning the Rumble is probably the highest in terms of where you're gonna get in terms of a push. So I was like, yeah, this is great. It's kind of like he's flirting with the main event and it's putting back in the tag team. All right, because it's been proven that he can't really go with the main event style, and I was never that guy, right? Because I'm the guy that was cheering for Jinder Mahal. Because Jinder Mahal, you can argue there's WWE Zack Rydered him, as in he didn't have the fan support, but he was a guy that was bottom tier, shot straight to the title. Because kind of the issue I used to have with Zack Ryder is I was all in on the True Z, the True Z story, whatever the fuck that show was called, but I was all in on it.
Z True Long Island Story.
That's the one.
There you go.
I was all in on the guy, but the issue was he was still a goofball, right? And he never found the happy medium of the Matt Cardona of today. Of like, I can be goofy, I guess, in promos, but even then, I feel like he was seen as a clown for the longest time. So even when he got his push, he got the US title. It's kind of like he never evolved. But if he evolved, he'll move away from the thing that got him over. So that will go against what I said about Sami Zayn. Because I said the reason why Sami Zayn is not as he's popular, but he's respected, but he's not as popular as he was doing post Bloodline because he's not doing the antics that got him over with the Bloodline. He can't do the handshake every single week. He can't be saying oos or you're feeling oosy in every feud he's in. So it's quite hard to capitalize on the thing or harness the thing that got him over because you have to evolve. And that was the detriment to Zack Ryder. He couldn't really evolve. He's treated as a joke, to the point where he's got cucked by his so-called friend and girlfriend. So that all amalgamated into being nothing for Zack Ryder in the long run. Then he becomes Intercontinental Champion. Look at that. They actually spontaneously gave someone a title. They lasted for one day. And sometimes we pray for that. Skip it out for one day. I don't care. Give him the WrestleMania moment. He deserves it. He used to hold Razor Ramon's Intercontinental title. There's a picture of that. All that kind of bullshit. But LA Knight, he's another guy. Give him the title at Saturday Night main event. Had it been him that won it, and let him lose it 2 weeks later. So that way I can say he's been world champion. My Mick Foley conditioned brain is happy with that. I miss days when guys would get rewarded because Mick Foley, he's not going to be face of a company, but he put his body on the line. 1988, he was undeniable. Shawn Michaels not around. Who's the guy to turn to? I think it is underrated because Triple H does a great job of like, I was a guy. No, you weren't. You were injury prone in 98, dude. You hardly were wrestling, right? People remember in the time of 1988. Besides that, what else did he do? Not much. If you think about Triple H, did not do much in 98. The feud with The Rock for when they were trading internal title. Yes. That and the SummerSlam stuff. That's all he did. He spent the rest of the time injury prone on crutches or whatever. He was not a guy.
I don't disagree.
Foley, yes.
Yeah.
But Mick Foley, he was over as Cactus Jack. But they're like, oh, dude, we need you. Because Shawn Michaels is not there to face Stone Cold Steve Austin in his first feud. Who's there?
Mhm.
Mick Foley as corporate dude Love. Then
Yeah.
go from corporate dude Love. He's Mankind again. Has that infamous Hell in a Cell match, and then throughout the year he becomes undeniable. He adds comedy to his forte. Gets over Mr. Sucko. Who thought that would happen? And then he gets rewarded in December of '98. That's all in 1 year. Because when you start in 1998, you do not think, oh, this is the guy that's going to be world champion. He done things, and in the end, he was rewarded for it. And I miss the days where when you did get over, you get pushed. You think he was in the year's plans? No, he wasn't. Because back in them days, they were actually booking far ahead. Shawn Michaels changed things, I guess, because him not being factored into plans, you had to find other guys. They were trial testing Kane as champion. They're trial testing other guys. Taker probably, you can turn heel and trial test him as to be, the top heel, because when Shawn Michaels left, there was that vacuum of they needed a top heel in 1998. So they start testing many different wrestlers. They even tried to get Ultimate Warrior back.
Break glass in case of emergency, Ultimate Warrior.
It's a great thing it never came back, because that's a bit fucked up and weird. But yeah, what I'm trying to get at is I miss the days of if a wrestler gets over, we will incorporate them into plans, because they've done it in the past successfully. Yeah, we wanted Mick Foley to wrestle at WrestleMania 15 triple threat match, because apparently that was part of the plan. Then Shawn Michaels allegedly put the kibosh on it by whispering in Vince's ear or Austin's ear. And then the following year, this is another example of waiting too long. They waited to 2000 to put him at WrestleMania. And at that point, people were saying, didn't he retire? Right? It didn't make sense. Here's another example of waiting too long to pull the trigger on stuff. But what I'm trying to get at to wrap up my long diatribe is I miss the days of when you get over, you get pushed for it. LA Knight should get a token title reign. It doesn't have to be long, but it'd be enough for his fans. You got his fans quitting Twitter because it's a bit heartbreaking when you believe in someone. It's almost like a sports team. Go Blue Jays. When you're like,
go Blue Jays.
Right? You're in there. You're like, you're gonna win one day, and then when you don't win, you're like, I'm leaving and I'm not coming back, because it's hard to invest in someone and then they don't go all the way with them.
Yeah. I like the Mick Foley point a lot, because I think that has been something that even today, generally speaking, fans I think have been, I would say, clamoring for AEW to do something like that, where if it's someone like Eddie Kingston or somebody like a Mark Briscoe, these kind of names that people have talked about, when they're super hot and like could be someone who ends up as a world champion level guy, are they the kind of guy who necessarily needs the super long babyface world champion reign? Maybe not. Could you put the heat of their popularity and transfer some of that onto a heel who ends a world title reign of theirs after 2-3 weeks or so? That real short reign, is a tool. I think we as wrestling fans were very much conditioned through a real hot potato era of WWE booking, particularly like the late 2000s into the early 2010s, where I can't even remember how many times the WWE title changed hands in like 2011, but it was like every 2 weeks that belt was changing hands. And I think it drove a lot of people to just think, because that shit was so bad, that the short title reigns are bad, they're detrimental, we need to do away with them and just have long title reigns again. And now, like I said, that pendulum has swung back the other direction, where we never have the shorter title reigns. Sometimes it happens with mid-card belts or whatever. I wasn't opposed necessarily to like when Jey Uso won the Intercontinental title from Braun Breaker and immediately lost it back to him.
Same.
I was like, oh, that's a nice little thing. You could say that Jey Uso's been, singles champion at the time, thinking that was kind of the height that he was maybe going to reach. Little did I know. But I think that is kind of as close to an example of that as we've seen, at least within WWE. We've seen, again, the mid-card belt can have short little title reigns and switches and all of that in AEW. We've seen that with the TNT title has gone through periods where it can flip-flop. And unfortunately, most of those examples have been ones that haven't been as favorable. I want to sandwiched in the middle of Scorpio Sky and Sammy Guevara trading the belt, and then Wardlow and like
Hobbs and
Hobbs and Joe and all
Joe,
these
yeah,
guys swapping the belt
Darby.
and all that. In the middle of that was Samoa Joe and Darby Allin having a really good back and forth trading of the belt, hot potato feud. And I think that was a perfect example of how to do that shit well, right? It's just unfortunate that it comes sandwiched between two moldy pieces of bread,
Mhm.
but if you apply it to the main event scene, there's no reason. Like, people look back on Mick Foley and say that he's a 3-time WWE champion. It does not necessarily matter that those 3 reigns equal out to like 28 days or something as champion,
Lol.
right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure there were people at the time angry that Mick Foley was dropping the title back and everything.
Of course.
But, but again, hindsight being 2020, I can't look at a lot of those decisions with, Steve Austin and The Rock in a singles match at WrestleMania, looming right there and say like, well, you know, that's a pretty strong main event to go with for WrestleMania. You don't
Yes, sir.
get much bigger than that, right? So hindsight's 2020. You can look at all those things as good decisions. Maybe you wouldn't have done it at that time. That's fine. My point is, though, I think people would be receptive to that kind of style of booking if it is pulled out at the right moments.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's in AEW, capitalizing on the extreme popularity of someone who gets really hot, whether that be, an Eddie Kingston and Mark Briscoe or something like that when the moment's right, or doing that in WWE with a guy like an LA Knight, having him get absolutely fucked over by a dastardly heel. I don't know if that leads to LA Knight eventually winning the title back down the line or not, but one way or another, he can call himself world champion, right?
Yes.
That's not to say that you do that shit with everybody. I want to really hammer that
No.
point home, because when you do that shit with everybody, then you've got The Miz running around saying he's a 2-time WWE champion. You have Jack Swagger going around saying he's a former world champion. It's not exactly the same thing, but if you get a bunch of geeks being world champions, it makes your world title look worse. But if you apply this booking strategy to people that are hot and that are super, popular and have potential to be, assets to your company financially and creatively and everything like that, it can be used as a tool to kind of be your workaround to be like, well, we've got our plans over here. Steve Austin and The Rock is the plan for WrestleMania. If that's over there, we don't want to not do that. But if they just kept the belt on Rock from Survivor Series until WrestleMania 15, then you lose out on so much of what The Rock and Mick Foley are known for together, and so much of what Mick Foley is known for in terms of the peaks of his career. Everyone talks about the fucking, oh, that'll put butts in seats, and that whole moment where he wins the title on Raw. It's great. They show it every year in highlight packs and blah, blah, blah. It's great. You lose out on those kind of moments by not being willing to adapt. And that, again, I feel like I really am trying to hammer that point home. I'm preaching the adaptability of it, because that the rigidity of pro wrestling will be its demise.
I feel like you're doing a great job of trying to explain to people that it's not like a trauma dumping session about
Yeah.
the state of professional wrestling, even though it can be like that sometimes, because you do want to find a safe space to vent and trying to think of options of how we can improve things. We're talking about a hot potatoing of like 2010, 11 WWE you mentioned.
Yeah.
What year was that? Was that the year you were mentioning, right?
2011 is certainly a big one. Like 09, when they do the Cena and Orton hot potatoing shit. Like, the title in 2009 starts with Jeff Hardy, loses it to Edge at the Rumble. He loses it to
Mm.
Triple H at Chamber. Triple H loses it to Orton at Backlash. Orton loses it to Batista at Extreme Rules. Batista gets hurt, and Orton wins the belt back 8 days later. He then loses that belt to Cena at Breaking Point. Cena loses it back to Orton at Hell in a Cell. Then Orton loses that back to Cena at fucking Bragging Rights. And then Cena loses it to Sheamus at the end of the year. That is fucking insane. What the fuck are you on about?
Survivor Series winner right there, man. I mean, he
Hey,
invented that.
I went full 12 rounds of that one. I didn't miss a fucking single one. I can do the WWE title
Wow.
history, let me tell you.
2002 WWE is so that is like the birth of Ruthless Aggression 2002 WWE. But I have fond memories of that era for many reasons. SmackDown Shut Your Mouth, it was a transformative, it's a weird period in WWE trying to figure out who they are. It's the post, Attitude Era. Austin is winding down, The Rock is in Hollywood. Well, actually, Austin's on the outs.
No.
They go with the young guys. It is like the beginning of pushing young guys is 2002 because you can't rely on the veterans because they're either injured or not around. But there's a lot of title changes, right? You start off the year with Chris Jericho being champion, and you end the end of the year with Kurt Angle was WWE champion. That's how it ends, right? And then you had all these people. You had Undertaker had a run for a bit. Triple H had a cup of coffee being the top guy of WWE in 2002. And then Hogan had his nostalgia run. See, they paid it off. If Hogan was getting a nostalgia run today, he would not get the title because they don't do that anymore. They don't give returning legends who get like
Sting wasn't world champion in
no.
AEW.
That lets you know something. But then again, that's Sting. I can see Sting saying, "Don't give me the title." That's silly.
Well, yeah, Sting and Hulk Hogan have very different levels of ego. Let me tell you.
Right? Right? And then you go through a phase. Rock gets the title and breaks the record, and then Rock does something that not a lot of people did at the time. The one of the most selfless main eventers. Yeah, nowadays history's changed how the Rock is seen backstage, whatever it is. But at the time, he was one of the most selfless main eventers. He puts over a young Brock Lesnar, and who is a young Brock Lesnar without beating The Rock, who's ideally seen as 1B to Austin's 1A. And then you start a new movement. This is Ruthless Aggression. The face of it is going to be Brock Lesnar. And then you got John Cena trying to figure out who the heck that he is. You got Randy Orton trying to figure who the heck he is, why he's injured, and he ends up being Evolution. And you got Batista, no longer a deacon, but now being managed by Ric Flair, and he ended up being part of Evolution. But what I'm trying to say is the hot potatoing of titles in that year, it created I feel like different eras started. I think each time when you got a different world champion, it starts like a new chapter, a new storyline, a new world. And when we used to get that, it made it feel quite expansive in a weird way. Yeah, they had SmackDown as well. So you felt like you had two worlds happening at the same time, which kind of made it even bigger. But I miss when we, not even hot potato title, I miss 6-month title reigns. 3-month title reigns, where back in the days they used to like tout. He was champion for 3 months. He's a champion for 100 days. It didn't need to be close to 1,000 days or 600 days or whatever it was. I missed the days when in like 6 months was considered, wow, that is long, that is sustained, because it seemed like we had ADHD brain or wherever. You cannot sustain a title reign for that long without it being called the Reign of Terror, like Triple H or Jeff Jarrett. I think that was conditioned. If you're a heel and you have long title reigns and you're beating over baby faces, I mean, look at a guy like Booker T. His time will come in 2003. His time didn't come to 2006, and he had to be a heel, kind of a quasi-comedy character called King Booker. I was happy for him at that point. Does LA Knight need to become a goofy king called King Knight? I don't know. To become champion? I don't know.
I don't know. These t-shirts are too tight too, Billy.
What I'm trying to get at is, dude, I think wrestling time is cyclical, and I never knew that applied to tropes and what wrestling fans are into, because we were clamoring for long title reigns because it got ridiculous. Like, we cannot invest in a guy being a champion because he has it for 2 weeks. I think a guy like AJ Styles, there's a difference between AJ Styles and LA Knight, and I like LA Knight, I really do. But a guy like AJ Styles, you need that long title reign to put a stamp on it, because 9 times out of 10 he's gonna have great matches. I'm not saying that LA Knight can't have great matches. He's proven himself to be a better wrestler than the Miz, because a lot of times they look at LA Knight as like a Miz-like wrestler. I feel like Miz created a component. It's kind of weird because that ilk of being a talker and a wrestler, you could argue Ric Flair made it a thing, because you can think The Rock for modern purposes it's The Rock, wherever it is. But then you got like white guys that talk a lot, and they're like Mr. Kennedy, because it's weird. Mr. Kennedy is like a pre-Miz. I remember when Miz was around, and then you got Dolph Ziggler, and then Dolph Ziggler didn't become a talker until later. It's kind of like, if you're a talker, you might not be a great wrestler. MJF, they're trying to slap the Miz label on him, and he rebuked it. He's like, nah, I can work, dude. I was taught how to wrestle by bloody Brett Majors, or Brian Majors. Like, he taught me how to wrestle. And Kurt Hawkins, by the way, that's what I was trying to get at. It's like the skill set of
Monster Factory,
right? Is like the skill set of Kurt Hawkins, but with the charisma of MJF, and MJF
Monster Factory or Create a Pro.
Create a Pro.
There you go.
You think of Cap?
Yeah. Fact check.
Hey, listen, Creative Pro. Listen, MJF is a good guy in terms of like he got the one of the Boulder brothers involved. He
Yeah,
Statlander, Max Caster. He's a great A&R guy for getting young guys from Cap in there. I'm just calling it Cap because I like calling it
yeah,
Cap. But yeah, the Miz, I feel like LA Knight was painting that brush that he couldn't wrestle, and I was like, that's the guy that did a springboard and got super kicked by James Storm. That guy can't wrestle. That's when you knew people didn't know ball. I was like, LA Knight has proven himself in the ring. He's one of the few people to give AJ Styles decent matches. When AJ Styles is allergic to having great WrestleMania matches at this point. But what I was trying to get at was a guy like LA Knight, you're fine with him being champion for 2 weeks or a month cap.
yeah,
But AJ Styles has to have a long title reign because he's bloody AJ Styles. He's a guy we've always wanted to have to be in the biggest stage, to have the biggest push. So when he got it, I was fine because I feel like that was the beginning time when he won the title, where year title reigns was almost like, oh, a bonus. We don't get this a lot, and it happened. But now it
yeah,
happens too much, man. It happens a lot.
yeah,
Damien Priest had a long reign, but it solidified him. I was one of the people that defended Priest, and I'm happy. It put him on a level. Could you argue he's a main eventer? I feel like that reign has made him somewhat, applicable to be called a main eventer, but upper mid Carter is what you're gonna call
yeah.
him.
I think that's fair. I think generally, if you look at Damian Priest, I was not positive on his title reign as it was happening, and then it's kind of one of those deals where, like, if you step back afterwards and examine the painting after it's been finished, you go like, oh, that's not bad. That was pretty good. Like when he lost the title to Gunther at SummerSlam, I was like, you know what? Solid little title reign. I wouldn't put it among the best or anything like that, but like very solid. And immediately coming out of that, I thought that the pairing of the Terror Twins, him and Rhea Ripley, I thought really did well to keep the heat on both of
Mm-hmm.
them
Mm-hmm.
going forward into the fall. And then, fuck's sake, they just ran that Damian Priest Finn Balor program into the ground. They did basically just SummerSlam again at Survivor Series. I remember, I think you and I were doing like live reactions for that, where they just did Damian Priest and Gunther again with
Yeah.
another Finn Balor
Yeah.
distraction and
Same.
interference finish. And I was like, have we just skipped over these last 3 months? And by that point, I was like, all right, Damian Priest does not feel as big as he did 3 months
Mm-hmm.
prior.
Mm-hmm.
So we could go ultimately. I think what we'd like Ruthless discussion to be, we love these conversation topics because they take us in different directions and all of that sort of thing. But we promise some deep dives into guys and everything. And I think we'll certainly look at various different examples of that as time goes on, because I'd love to look at the run of someone like Punishment Martinez or various other people who are kind of there, maybe not, looking deeper into whether they are or not and why, kind of would make for interesting content,
Mm-hmm.
for various people. Because I think you're right. You could look at Damian Priest as, like, you could put him as a world title challenger on pay-per-view and no one would really like blink at it. But I also don't think that they immediately would think, well, he could win,
No.
you know? And that, I
No.
think, is the delineation. That, to me, to bring it all back, is where I think Drew is at right now, where you could,
Mm.
they're not necessarily like on a perfect parallel, the two of them, but I look at Drew when he gets put into a world title match on any of these shows, and I'm like, that's a good pay-per-view challenger. I don't necessarily think he's going to win. And of course, this is where he turns around and beats Cody for the title, makes a fool out of me. But again, he can
Please.
do that. He can do that, and I won't be upset about it. But I think there is that level of guy. And I think a lot of the time it's these kind of folk who maybe they go kind of halfway, they give him the title, and then capitalizing on that after the fact has not been their strong suit either. In that, you just kind of keep them in, kind of floating around that upper mid card. Keeping people's momentum going has been a struggle for WWE these last few years. I think, generally speaking, a lot of their booking practices have been a struggle over the last few years. But that has been one that I think, if you are better at that, it solves a lot of your problems. Just
Mm-hmm.
kind of generally having top guys you can go to. If all of a sudden people get hurt, you've kept other guys hot so that you can slide them into that top spot on a moment's notice, all that sort of thing. I get it. Again, all these things are much easier said than done, But I do think if a concerted effort is made into keeping some of these people at higher levels than they would be otherwise, I think it does solve a lot of your problems.
I feel like we're reaching a natural conclusion to this conversation. Even though I was
I
gonna
agree.
drop in Adam Cole and NXT and how they waited too long, and look where we are as a conversation piece to keep running. But I just wanted to mention this one thing before we completely wrap up. I feel like we stumbled onto two types of pushes that we look for in a wrestler. So Damian Priest being champion, I would argue because he wasn't groomed, even though he won the United States title, he was one of those wrestlers where, because of how unstable Vince McMahon's booking practices was, you didn't even know what he was looking for in a world champion, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Any guy, for example, I assumed because Bruce Pritchard mentioned there was something to wrestle with, because Bruce, I think, worked with him in MLW. He's like, Riddle was a future world champion. I believed Riddle was going to be a future world champion for the simple fact that he could wrestle. He's got the MMA pedigree and so forth. He wanted to end Lesnar, retire him. He looked like a lost Von Erich, by the way, guys. I still feel like it was a missed opportunity that he wasn't in Iron Claw, because he looks like a lost member, right? And he's also barefooted like Kevin Von Erich.
I see what you mean.
I always felt like he had Von Erich-esque coded thing about him. He self-destructs, but even back at NXT, he lost to Timothy Thatcher. So I always felt like his booking was a bit wonky, because he felt like he was gonna have the Bobby Roode trajectory of like hot indie guy. I don't know if North American title was around when he was there, but maybe win that, then win the world title, then go into main roster. But he had the whole thing with him and Pete Dunne, and then he got Pete Dunne got injured, then he went to the main roster. RK Bro is probably what he'll be remembered for. His match with Sheamus at WrestleMania is where I look to saying that's when Sheamus started wrestling started wrestling the way he does now, because that was hard hitting, smash knee in the face. If you want to know the Sheamus of today, as people like to call him, the Ishii of bloody WWE, it originated. That is his his Shibata match. That is his match with Riddle is when they win. That is a good match. People should go back and look at it. That United States title match
agree.
was like
Very good match.
Was when
Kicks him in the
Sheamus,
fucking mouth.
right? Who I'm trying to get at, right? There's a guys like Adam Cole before he left was primed. Guys that are groomed to be world champion. Those are the ones I want to go back to the world of being world champion. Damian Priest is like Mick Foley. Guys that weren't groomed to be world champion, win it later in their career, but you're happy they won it. It's kind of like, good job. Like all the sacrifices you made in life, your real life story. I think it's the underdog guys. The underdog guys that are like, Eddie Kingston, like Mark Briscoe, guys that you're like, they don't tick the box, but when they do win it, you're like, I never expect you to win it. I don't know if you ever do it again, but congrats. You always have that in your box. But Drew McIntyre is like the Rock ilk, the guys that are groomed for the future. I mean, the guy was called the future for a reason. Cody Rhodes is another example. Guys who told me from a young age that we're going to build the wrestling industry around. Those are the guys you can't be like, you can't book like Mick Foley. Drew McIntyre cannot be booked like a Mick Foley type. He is the type that you build companies around. You don't build a company around a Damian Priest. Damian Priest is just a good, solid hand.
You realized what you were going to say as you were saying it.
I know, because I'm trying to say there is two types of bookings.
I thought you were making a great point, and then you said the thing that wrestlers don't like to be called.
I know, because I'm trying to say he's a good utility backup player for when you need something. It's kind of like if main event seems down, at least because he's been world champion, he could be a viable threat. That's what I'm trying to get at. But that's what
he's got credibility for sure because of that world title, and not a bad world title reign. I completely agree with the point that you were making before you said the bad thing.
I know. I was like, don't say it. I need another word.
There was no other word that you could have chosen at that moment. You'd committed too far. But no, I agree. I think giving the title to those certain people not only is a great babyface underdog story that we all can just kind of latch onto, and it's an easy story to tell, gives them the credibility going forward. And again, Damian Priest, now if you slide him into a world title program, I think does much better for having been world champion than he would have otherwise.
Bingo.
So I think it wraps up our conversation. Nice little bow there. We'll get out of here. We'll enjoy the rest of our weekend. I'll have a nap and prepare myself for game 2 of the World Series. Holy hot dog. Gonna keep on going. I'm gonna lose my mind this week, let me tell you. So I might be in a different state of mind when we come back for our Dynamite review for members only this coming Thursday. Make sure that you're subscribed to the member tier here on WrestlePure so that you don't miss that. Thank you again, Sat, for joining me, my wonderful co-host. Thank
Before
you all.
Before you go, guys, in the comment section, let us know what else you like us to discuss, because that is a whole thing. We want it to be a communal thing, because as
Yeah,
wrestling
of
fans,
course.
there are certain conversation points that you've always wanted to have, but sometimes you're like, no one's listening, no one's bringing this up. Let us know what topics you want us to cover for ruthless discussions, certain tropes you've noticed, or themes, or trends that's been happening in wrestling that you've noticed that you want us to talk about, and we would like to take suggestions to do deep dives on. Thank you.
Absolutely. We would love to have this show just continue on and on and on. And thankfully, wrestling is an ever evolving business. We'll always have something to talk about, but we want to talk about the things that you want to hear or listen to most. So make sure you let us know in the comments down below. We do check them. We love the interactions. We will hopefully be back live next week. This one, we're busy people. So we got busy people. I got to go to my great aunt's 100th birthday party today.
Wow.
So,
Centennial.
good genes, let me tell you. So, that being said, hopefully we'll be back live next week and you can join in the conversation in the chat. Until then, let us know what you want to hear in the comments down below. We're going to have ourselves a lovely weekend. Make sure you do too. Thank you, Sat. I will look forward to seeing you again, brother. Love talking to you.
You too. Love you, man.
Cheers, all. Have a good weekend. That was Ruthless Discussion.